Welcome back to Sleepy Crime. Lay your phone to the side and enjoy tonight's story. Don't forget to subscribe for nightly true crime stories. Let's begin. The Vanishing of Willow Creek. In the green, fog-draped hills of the Pacific Northwest, nestled between sleepy woods and winding streams, lay the forgotten town of Willow Creek. Once a bustling mill town, by 1987 it had faded into quiet obscurity, its population reduced to fewer than 400 people. Most houses stood decades old, clad in weather-worn siding and framed by rusted fences, while moss grew thick on rooftops like nature's heavy blanket. The townsfolk were kind but reserved, keepers of routine and silence. Morning fog rolled in like clockwork, and it was only broken by the occasional crow or the distant creak of the town's namesake water wheel, which hadn't turned in years. Among the few who still wandered the main street was Mrs. Edna Bramble, the elderly librarian, who had lived in Willow Creek since the 1940s. Every Wednesday, Edna opened the library at 9 a.m. sharp. She would flip the brass sign on the door, brew a cup of black tea, and settle into her wingback chair with a woolen blanket over her knees. Children rarely came anymore. Most had moved with their families closer to the city, where jobs and life moved faster. But Edna didn't mind. She said silence was the truest company. But one morning in early November, something disrupted her rhythm. When she unlocked the doors and stepped inside, she noticed the smallest thing, a draft. A window in the far aisle, the one nearest the old true crime section, was unlatched. Strange, she thought. She had locked it herself the night before. Her memory was sharp. She was sure of it. On the table beneath the window sat a dusty hardback, Mysteries of the Northwest, Unsolved Disappearances. It wasn't there yesterday. She would have noticed. The book was large, with a cracked spine and a faded green jacket. Curious, she carried it to the front desk and opened it. Inside, on the blank first page, someone had scrawled in messy, hurried pencil. Look again at 1934. Edna blinked. Then read it twice more. The word stirred something. 1934. Willow Creek's records from that year were patchy. There had been a flood, she remembered vaguely. And a boy who had vanished, his name, she couldn't recall just yet. But her fingers began to tremble. Not with fear, but with something else. A quiet knowing. Edna had lived through every season this town had seen. But this felt like the start of something long buried, now rising through the fog. Edna set the book gently on the desk, smoothing the page with her palm. The handwriting was unfamiliar, jagged, like it had been scribbled in a rush, but something about it felt old. Not just the ink or the paper, but the tone of the message. It didn't read like a prank. It felt like a whisper from the past. She reached under the desk, retrieving a manila folder where she kept her personal notes, odds and ends she'd collected over the years about Willow Creek's strange and scattered history. There were stories about the mill shutting down, the power going out during a solar storm in '73, and that old tale about the twins who claimed they saw a man made of mirrors in the woods. But she didn't have anything about 1934. That year was always blank, even in the town archives. She rose slowly, adjusting her shawl, and shuffled to the back room of the library, a place barely touched in decades. It smelled of cedar, dust, and the faintest trace of pipe smoke. She kept the archived papers here, school records, ledgers, and forgotten obituaries. Thick gray filing cabinets lined the walls, each drawer labeled by year. The drawer marked 1934 was jammed. Edna tugged, then braced her feet and pulled again. It gave way with a hollow metallic clunk, revealing almost nothing. A few yellowed receipts, one water-damaged birth certificate, and a brittle flyer for the Spring Jubilee on April 14th. That was it. Until she spotted the corner of something tucked behind the drawer. A photograph. She reached in and gently teased it free. It was black and white, with a torn corner and faint pencil on the back, Creek Bridge, June 1934. The image showed 4 boys sitting on the wooden railing of the old bridge near the mill pond. They were smiling, one mid-laugh. Behind them, the trees blurred into a quiet canopy of shadows. Edna recognized none of them, except maybe the tallest boy on the left. There was something about his posture, the tilt of his head. She returned to the desk and flipped open Mysteries of the Northwest to the index. Her finger ran down the listings: Oregon, Port Townsend, Whidbey Island, Willow Creek. There it was. Page 147. She turned to it and stared. The heading read: The disappearance of Thomas Alder, age 14, last seen. June 1934, Willow Creek. Alder. That name. She remembered now. Her older brother had once said the Alder family left town, for good reason, but refused to explain. Just said their house had a bad attic. Edna leaned back in her chair. The fog outside pressed softly against the windows. This wasn't just a memory stirring. Someone wanted her to look. Someone had reopened the mystery. The name Thomas Alder lingered in Edna's mind like the echo of a half-remembered song. She closed the book gently and rested her hand on it for a moment, as if it might pulse with warmth or whisper more secrets. The boy in the photo, the one with the cautious smile and distant eyes, had to be him. Edna had lived in Willow Creek nearly her whole life. In 1934, she would have been just a girl of 8. Old enough to remember the rhythm of the town, but too young to have been told the truth about a disappearance. Back then, adults protected children with silence, hoping that not knowing would be the same as forgetting. But Edna hadn't forgotten the feeling of that summer. Something strange had crept into town, not an event, but an atmosphere. She remembered her mother locking the doors earlier than usual. She remembered her father, a soft-spoken man, leaving his shotgun propped near the back door for a time. No one ever said why. She reopened the book and read the brief article. It was only 2 paragraphs long. According to the report, Thomas Alder was last seen walking home from the creek after fishing with friends. His parents assumed he had stopped by the general store, or perhaps lingered too long in the woods. But by sunset, he had not returned. A search was organized the next day, and over the course of the week, nearly the entire town joined in. But no trace was ever found. No footprints. No fishing pole. No signs of struggle. Just gone. But the oddest part was what came next. 2 of the boys who had been fishing with Thomas, both in that very photo, left town shortly afterward. One moved away with family. The other, according to the book, refused to speak of the incident ever again. He died in 1972 in a town not far away. Edna tapped the edge of the book, thinking. What bothered her most was the book itself. It hadn't been checked out in years. She hadn't seen it on the shelf yesterday. And who had written that message, "Look again at 1934"? Why now? She glanced out the window. The fog had thickened. Across the narrow road stood the outline of the Alder house. Long abandoned, it sat crumbling at the edge of the woods, its front porch sagging, windows gaping like tired eyes. A thought crept into her mind, uninvited. Had that window really opened itself last night? Or had someone come through? That evening, Edna closed the library early. The wind had picked up. Not sharply, but enough to make the trees sway gently and the hanging sign over Mill Street Cafe clatter with a rhythm that sounded almost deliberate. She moved slowly along the sidewalk, her scarf pulled close and her eyes often drifting back toward the Alder house. It had stood there for decades, untouched and unsold. Even the local teens never dared break in. It was the one place no one joked about, not even during dares or ghost stories around the fire pit by Pike's Field. People just avoided it, like a bad dream you don't want to remember. But now, as she walked past it, something made Edna stop. The front gate, which had been sealed shut with a heavy iron chain for years, now hung loose. The lock rested on the ground beside it, rusted but clearly opened. Not cut. Unlatched. She stood at the edge of the property, her boots rooted in gravel, the old house looming before her. The porch creaked even in stillness. Windows on the second floor were fogged over, stained by decades of rain and pine needles. And then, just for a moment, Edna saw something. A flicker in the upstairs window. Not movement. Light. A faint glow, like a lantern or candle held just behind the curtain. She blinked, looked again. It was gone. Edna stepped back. Logic tried to catch up with what her eyes insisted they saw. No one lived there. No one had for 70 years. And yet, when she returned home, she dug through her attic, moving aside old hatboxes and photo albums until she found a worn blue binder marked Town Records, personal copies. These were her own clippings and handwritten notes. Over the years, she'd quietly collected what she could, articles the library had lost, stories people didn't want archived. She flipped to the page for Thomas Alder. It was mostly blank. A few scribbled dates. A question mark beside the name of one of his fishing companions, someone called R. Holden. Holden. The name sounded familiar. Edna turned on her small desk lamp and pulled out the town's 1933 census booklet. She ran her finger down the list. There it was, Holden, Robert. Age 14. Parents, Everett and June. Address, 12, Spruce Lane. But someone had penciled a note beside it. Moved. Refused to give forwarding address. Family left night of June 12, 1934. That was the day after Thomas vanished. The timing sent a ripple of unease through her chest. It was all starting to line up, but not in a way that made sense. In a way that waited. And then her phone rang. Edna jumped. No one called her at this hour. No one had in years. She picked up the receiver slowly. "Hello?" she said, her voice soft but steady. There was a long pause. Then, a whisper, just 3 words. "Don't trust Holden." The line went dead. Edna sat frozen, the receiver still pressed to her ear, even though the line had long since gone silent. The click of disconnection echoed in her mind like the close of a vault. "Don't trust Holden." The voice was low, calm, but not mechanical. It was human. She would have remembered such a voice. She slowly placed the phone back on its cradle, her fingers trembling slightly, not from fear, but from that particular kind of tension that comes when everything almost makes sense. She turned back to the census record. Robert Holden. There were no more notes, nothing to suggest where he had gone, or if he was still alive. But Edna had a hunch. She opened her old rotary file and pulled out a contact card for a woman named Lillian Knox, the town's former postmistress. Lillian had moved to a care home 2 towns over but had a sharp memory and a love for gossip. Edna dialed the number. 2 rings. Then, a cheerful voice answered. "This is Lillian." "Lillian, dear, it's Edna Bramble." "Oh. Edna. I thought you'd gone quiet for good," she chuckled. "What brings you calling this late?" "I need to ask about a family. The Holdens. They lived on Spruce Lane. Left in 1934. Lillian didn't respond right away. Then, she said quietly, "You're not the first to ask." That surprised Edna. "Oh. Man came by about a week ago. Middle-aged. Gray jacket. Asked about Robert Holden. Said he was working on a book. True crime sort of thing." Edna's stomach tightened. "What did you tell him?" "I told him the same thing I'll tell you. That family left fast. The story went that Robert came home the night Thomas disappeared and locked himself in the cellar. Wouldn't come out. Next morning, the family packed everything they could into a truck and drove off before sunrise. Left their dog behind. People said it howled for days. There was a pause. Then Lillian said, "Funny thing is, I checked. No forwarding address was ever filed." Edna thanked her and hung up, but the image of the howling dog stayed with her. She turned again to the photograph of the 4 boys on the bridge. She looked closer this time, really studied the boy on the far right. Shorter, a slouched posture. His smile didn't quite reach his eyes. That had to be Robert Holden. But the shadows behind the boys, something felt off. At first glance, it was just forest. But now, as Edna leaned in under the lamplight, she noticed what looked like a 5th shape. Barely visible. Too tall to be a boy. Slightly blurred, like motion caught mid-frame. A long figure. Standing just beyond the trees. Watching. Edna stared at the photo, her breath shallow. That figure, tall, still, just at the edge of the woods, wasn't something you noticed right away. It blended into the tree line, obscured by shadow and time. But now that she'd seen it, she couldn't unsee it. It had no clear face. No features, just a long, dark shape. Like a man standing impossibly still. She slid the photo under the desk lamp and reached for a magnifying glass. The edges of the figure were strangely soft, not blurred from movement, but smudged, almost. Like whatever, or whoever, had been standing there hadn't fully belonged in the frame. A chill passed over her shoulders. She left the photo on the desk and went to close the curtains. Outside, the night had fallen thick and quiet. Fog clung to the streets like a veil, and the alder house across the road stood as still as ever. No light. No movement. She returned to her desk and wrote in her notebook. Robert knew. He saw something. Maybe all 4 did. 1 vanished. 2 fled. 1 stayed quiet. And now, 70 years later, someone had opened the window. Someone had returned the book. And someone had called her, warning, "Don't trust Holden." But Robert Holden hadn't lived here in decades. If he was even alive, he'd be in his late 90s. And still, the phone call. The figure in the woods. The name scratched in pencil. Edna couldn't sleep. She wrapped a shawl tightly around herself and made tea, strong black, with a slice of lemon the way she liked it. And then, at 12:42 a.m., as the kettle cooled and the fog pressed against her windows like wool soaked in water, she made a decision. She would go to the alder house. Not immediately. But soon. The longer she waited, the more the feeling grew, not of fear, but of urgency. Like something had shifted and was waiting to be noticed again. She returned to the library that morning before sunrise, unlocking the doors as she always did. She turned on only a few lights. Enough to see. Enough to think. At her desk, the photograph still sat where she'd left it. But now, beneath it, another note. Not handwritten this time. Typed. Do not let the attic door close behind you. Edna stared at the new note, her hand hovering just above it. The paper was thin and pale, standard typewriter stock. She hadn't used a typewriter in years. Who had written it? More importantly, when? The library had been locked all night. She picked it up gently. The ink was faint but clean, no smudges, no signature. Just those 9 words. Do not let the attic door close behind you. It was less of a warning and more of an instruction, she realized. Practical. Plain. Not unlike the earlier message, look again at 1934, but this one felt more immediate. She looked again at the alder house through the library window. It sat unchanged. Still, heavy with silence. But now she felt a pull toward it, not curiosity, but a strange kind of duty. As if someone, or something, was waiting for her to finish a story that had been left incomplete. At noon, she packed a small satchel. Flashlight. Thermos of tea. gloves, the photo. And, hesitating for a moment, she tucked the typed note inside her coat pocket. Then she crossed the street. The alder house loomed taller up close. The siding was curled and peeling. Vines had woven their way into the porch rails. The air smelled of damp wood and something faintly metallic, like old pennies left in the rain. She stepped through the gate and onto the porch. The boards creaked under her weight, but held. The front door was slightly ajar. She pushed it open. The interior smelled musty and still, untouched for decades. Dust hung in the air like fog. The wallpaper had long since peeled away in strips, revealing the bones of the house beneath, nail heads, warped beams, forgotten corners. But more than the dust, what struck her most was the silence. Not even the creak of old wood. Just absence. She moved slowly, checking each room. The living room was sparse, an overturned armchair, a broken picture frame. The kitchen was worse. Ceiling panels had collapsed, letting in years of water and decay. Edna paused at the bottom of the staircase. The second floor waited. With each step upward, the air grew colder. The hallway upstairs was lined with faded doors, most ajar. She passed what must have been the children's room, 2 twin beds, one missing a mattress, the other with a collapsed frame. Toys lay scattered across the floor, caked in dust. A wooden soldier. A marble. A yellowed book with no cover. Then she reached the final door at the end of the hallway. It was different. Not a bedroom, not a closet. Narrower. A small door with a rounded top, no knob, just an iron latch. The attic. She placed her hand on it. A deep breath. A long pause. And then she opened it. The attic stairs were steep and narrow. As she climbed, the air grew even colder, more still. She reached the top and pushed open the hatch. The attic was pitch black. She flicked on her flashlight. A single chair sat in the center of the room. And behind her, without sound, without warning, the attic door began to swing shut. Edna spun around just in time to catch the attic door with her foot. It had moved silently, too silently. No creak, no draft, no reason. Just a quiet, deliberate motion. She braced her shoulder against it and wedged her satchel between the door and the frame. It wasn't much, but it would hold. The note's warning had been clear: don't let the attic door close behind you. Her breath was shallow now, not from fear, but focus. She turned back into the attic, flashlight beam cutting through the darkness like a finger through smoke. The space was surprisingly empty. No boxes. No clutter. Just rafters, cobwebs, and that single wooden chair in the middle of the room. She approached it slowly. Its surface was worn smooth with age, but one thing stood out immediately: a small piece of twine wrapped around the back slat. Tied to it was a tag, like the kind you'd find on an old suitcase. On the tag was a name, written in faint pencil. Thomas Alder. Edna's mouth went dry. This wasn't furniture. It was a marker. A memorial. Or, a message. She lowered herself onto her knees beside the chair and ran her fingers over the floor. The wood was scratched in places, scuffed, as though something heavy had been dragged. Then her flashlight caught something etched faintly into the plank just beneath the chair. He followed us home. The words were carved shallow, but deliberately. He. She looked around the attic again, slowly now, trying to listen to more than just sound. To feel. There was a strange heaviness here. Not threatening, but old. Watchful. In the far corner, half covered by shadow, was an old trunk. Not dusty like the rest. Its metal latches were free of rust. That alone made it suspicious. She rose and stepped toward it, heart steady, breath careful. The trunk wasn't locked. She flipped the clasps open, one by one. Inside was a small stack of folded papers, a dried bouquet of wildflowers tied with ribbon, and an envelope with no stamp, no address. Just a name. Edna Bramble. She stared at it for a moment. Then opened it. Inside was a single typed sheet. I know you'll come. I hope you do. He doesn't like closed spaces. That's why the attic door matters. That's why we left. We weren't supposed to look back. But I did. I think he noticed. R.H. She read it again. Robert Holden. Edna stepped back and suddenly the attic felt smaller, like the walls were leaning in. Her flashlight flickered, once, then again, before humming back to full strength. In the silence that followed, she became aware of one very specific thing. There were footsteps, but not hers. Soft. From the far end of the attic. Approaching. The footsteps were slow. Not heavy, not loud, just a gentle, deliberate shuffle across old wood. As if someone, or something, wasn't trying to hide, but wasn't in a rush either. Just, arriving. Edna stayed very still. Her flashlight trembled in her hand, casting long, crooked shadows across the beams overhead. The chair. The open trunk. The empty corners. Nothing moved. And yet, the sound continued, measured, patient, until it stopped just beyond the edge of her light. She aimed the beam toward the far corner. Empty. But not silent. Now there was breathing. Low. Rhythmic. Not menacing, just present. Too present. She didn't speak. She didn't run. Instead, Edna slowly backed toward the attic door, keeping the flashlight steady, her free hand reaching for the satchel wedged in the frame. She could feel the cold air changing, shifting, not like a breeze, but like a vacuum. As if something had entered the room by removing itself from somewhere else. The kind of presence that leaves space colder not by arriving, but by unmaking the warmth. She reached the door. It remained slightly ajar, exactly as she'd left it. Carefully, she slipped through and lowered it shut, but didn't let it latch. Whatever this was, it didn't feel finished. And it didn't feel like it wanted her to leave. Not yet. Back in the hallway, the house felt different. Heavier. The silence had a tone now, like a low hum you could feel in your teeth. She descended the stairs quickly, flashlight cutting swaths of light across peeling wallpaper and cracked tiles. She reached the living room. The front door, still slightly open, let in a shaft of pale gray light. But just as she reached for it, a voice. Soft. Not behind her, but inside the room. I looked back too. She turned. No one there. But something had changed in the space. She stepped slowly to the center of the room. There, resting on the fireplace mantel, was another envelope. Pale yellow. Still warm, somehow, as if just placed there. She opened it. Typed on another sheet of paper. The creek holds more than water. There's a room under the bridge. We sealed it once. We thought it would help. He doesn't live in houses. He waits in places where names are forgotten. At the bottom was a final line, handwritten in ink. You have to see it for yourself. Edna stood very still. She looked again out the front door, past the overgrown yard and leaning fence, toward the distant silhouette of the old wooden bridge where the boys had once posed for that photo. The sun was beginning to set. And beneath the fog, the creek whispered. By the time Edna reached the edge of the bridge, the sun had dipped below the ridge, and dusk began to soak the town in lavender-gray shadow. The air was damp, and the wooden planks of the bridge creaked beneath her steps, quietly, like they remembered every footfall that had come before. She paused at the center, where the boys had once sat for the photograph. The water below moved lazily, dark and smooth, reflecting only the faintest bit of sky. The forest lining the creek had grown wild, draping the edges like a curtain. Edna knelt carefully, inspecting the underside of the bridge rail. Her hands brushed over moss, splinters, cold bolts, and then, something odd. A slight gap between two planks. Subtle. Hidden. She leaned closer. There, carved into the underside of the wood, barely visible unless the light caught it just right, was a word. Below. A direction. Or a warning. She made her way off the bridge and down the slope that curved beneath it. The stone supports were old but still held firm. Brambles and vines had twisted around the foundation over time, but as she cleared them away with gloved hands, she uncovered something unexpected. A door. Half-rotted, wooden, sunken slightly into the earth, disguised by time and growth. She pulled at the handle. It groaned and resisted. Then, with a sudden pop, it gave way and opened inward with a breath of cold, earthy air. Behind it was a narrow stone passage, descending at a slight angle. The walls were damp and covered in lichen. The ceiling was low. It felt like a forgotten root cellar, but the kind no one had ever used for food. She turned on her flashlight. Steps. Downward. There was no sound except for the distant murmur of the creek above. She hesitated at the threshold, remembering the words from the note, "There's a room under the bridge." We sealed it once. Edna took a breath and descended. The stone steps were slick, uneven. As she moved down, the air grew colder, not from natural chill, but from a kind of emptiness that felt almost ancient. Like the very space had been hollowed out. Then, she reached it. A small, square room carved into the stone. Bare walls. Dirt floor. No furniture. No writing. Just one thing. In the center, a circle. Roughly etched into the floor, made of stones placed deliberately, small, flat, river-worn stones, each no larger than a fist. At the center of the circle sat a single object. A pocket watch. Old. Closed. Its silver tarnished, chain curled beside it like a sleeping snake. She knelt beside it and picked it up. The weight surprised her. It was warm. She turned it over and saw initials etched into the back. T.A. Thomas Alder. The moment she touched the latch, something shifted in the room. Not a sound. Not a movement. A pressure, subtle, but unmistakable. As if something had noticed her. As if the very walls were listening. And in the silence, beneath the hush of stone and time, she heard one faint sound that did not belong. Tick. The ticking was soft, distant at first, like a heartbeat just beyond hearing. Edna's fingers froze on the pocket watch's latch. She hesitated, then slowly flipped it open. The watch face gleamed faintly in her flashlight's beam. The hands were still, frozen at precisely 4:17. The glass was cracked, spiderwebbing from the center out like a frozen splash. But the ticking continued, growing slightly louder, more insistent. Edna's breath caught. Her gaze flicked back to the circle of stones. The edges seemed to shimmer faintly, as if the boundary between moments had thinned here. She set the watch down gently and took a small step back. The room felt colder now, not unpleasantly so, but heavy, as though layered in years of quiet waiting. Suddenly, a whisper floated through the chamber. Barely audible. Like the rustle of leaves in an unseen wind. "He waits." Edna's heart fluttered. The voice was so soft, she almost thought she imagined it. She gathered herself. The mystery was no longer just about a vanished boy or a forgotten family. It was something else. Something tied to time and place, to moments frozen and secrets held beneath the creek. Outside, the first stars blinked awake. Edna rose and pocketed the watch. Her mind raced with questions but also a strange calm. The room had spoken, but gently, almost kindly. As she retraced her steps up the stone staircase, the creak of the old door behind her closed with a soft click. Back in the night air, the fog had deepened, curling around the trees like slow-moving smoke. Edna stood for a moment, listening to the creak's steady murmur. Tomorrow, she thought, she would begin piecing it all together. But for now, the story was waiting, patient. Waiting for the morning. The next morning, the town stirred slowly, as if waking from a deep, long dream. Edna returned to the library, the pocket watch safely tucked inside her coat pocket, its weight a quiet reminder of the night's discoveries. She spent the day combing through old newspapers, yellowed with age and brittle at the edges. The town's archives, once neglected, suddenly seemed alive with whispers. Articles from the 1930s revealed little more than small-town life, mild floods, harvest festivals, the occasional missing pet. But then she found it. A brief mention in a June 1934 edition, a local boy, Thomas Alder, missing for days, last seen near the creek bridge. The article was cautious, almost evasive. It hinted at townsfolk unwilling to talk, neighbors whispering of strange lights and eerie sounds in the woods. Edna noted a line at the very bottom, barely visible, search called off after mysterious incidents reported near the Alder property. Mysterious incidents? Her mind returned to the attic door, the phone call, the flickering light in the Alder house window. That evening, Edna walked back past the house, noticing for the first time a faded carving on the front porch post, an interlocking pattern of circles, worn smooth by time. It matched the circle etched in the stone room beneath the bridge. And the pocket watch. A symbol of cycles, of time folding back upon itself. She paused, touching the weathered wood. There was a soft sound, like the creek's gentle rush, or a distant clock's steady beat. Somewhere in Willow Creek, the past and present were entwined, waiting for someone who would not look away. Edna smiled softly. She would stay. Days turned into weeks, but Edna found herself drawn deeper into the mystery, not with frantic urgency but with a quiet determination. She reached out to neighbors, shared stories carefully, and slowly, pieces of the town's hidden history began to surface. The Alders, it seemed, were part of something older than the mill or the creek itself, a secret passed down through generations. One afternoon, while sorting through boxes in the basement of the library, Edna discovered a faded journal belonging to Thomas Alder's father. Its pages were brittle and stained, but inside were notes written in careful cursive. Observations about strange lights flickering near the creek at night, odd sounds like clockwork ticking from beneath the water, and warnings to protect the family from what waits beyond time's door. Edna read slowly, savoring the words. The journal spoke of a presence that was neither good nor evil, but bound by an ancient cycle, a watcher of moments lost between past and present. She realized then that the disappearance was not a crime in the usual sense. It was a crossing. A gap where time folded, swallowing those who lingered too long. The town's silence had been a shield, a way to keep the cycle unbroken. But Edna was different. She had seen. She had listened. And now, the story of Willow Creek was no longer buried in fog and shadow. It was alive. Edna sat at her desk late into the night, the journal open beside her and the pocket watch ticking softly in her palm. Outside, the fog curled thick around the library windows, wrapping the town in quiet calm. She felt a strange peace, as if she were part of something much larger, a story that spanned generations, time itself folding like pages in a book. The last entry in the journal was a letter, written but never sent. To whoever finds this, know that some doors are best left unopened. But if you read these words, perhaps the time has come to remember, to face the watcher beneath the creek. Do not fear the passing. It is not an end, but a beginning. Elias Alder. Edna glanced at the pocket watch. The hand still pointed to 4:17. She realized that moment was frozen in time, the exact minute Thomas vanished. Yet now, she held the key to understanding it. Tomorrow, she would return to the creek, to the circle of stones, to the quiet room beneath the bridge. But for tonight, she let the steady ticking lull her into rest, knowing the story was not finished. It was waiting, for the next chapter, the next moment, the next watcher. The dawn broke soft and pale over Willow Creek, the fog lifting slowly as light spilled across the hills and rooftops. Edna stood once more at the edge of the creek, the pocket watch resting quietly in her hand. She looked at the circle of stones, the carved door beneath the bridge, and took a deep breath. Today, she would not just observe. She would understand. As she descended the steps into the hidden chamber, the air felt warm, different from before, like the space itself was welcoming her. She placed the watch carefully in the center of the stone circle. The ticking grew louder, steady and calm, filling the room with a gentle rhythm. Edna closed her eyes. For a moment, the past and present blurred, the vanished boy, the fishing friends, the long-abandoned house, all folding into one quiet moment beneath the creek's watchful flow. She opened her eyes and smiled softly. The story was not about fear or loss. It was about time, memory, and the quiet endurance of those who remain, even when unseen. She rose and stepped back, feeling the weight lift. Outside, the sun warmed the fog away, and Willow Creek stirred to life once more, a town wrapped in its secrets, but ready to keep walking forward. And Edna, the quiet librarian with a steady heart, knew she was part of that story now. The watcher of moments, the keeper of whispers, the gentle guardian of time.